Yeah, good questions, Jeffrey. Yeah, I really like your questions. One of your questions was, is glycogen similar to glucose? And actually, glycogen is just long chains of glucose. So we store our energy as glycogen. So all of these little six carbon little shaped is a glucose molecule. So all of these are glucose, and this connection, the way it's connected, makes it glycogen. So we store energy, long chains of glucose, as glycogen in muscles and in liver. So that's the first energy that the cell uses when it needs to get the glucose. Starch, which we usually eat a lot of starch food to give us the glucose, also has these long chains of glucose too, but these connections are very different. So it's just even though it looks similar, it's a little bit chemically different. So then glycogen. Okay, so very similar. And cellulose too. Cellulose is also long chains of carbon, but this connection is, we can't actually break it down. So cellulose is actually fiber. Okay, so yeah, so long chains of glycogen. Glucose is glycogen. Okay, and then the next question. Um, I'm off. I'll just try to scoot it over. Okay, and so your next question is, how does glucose turn into uh, pyruvic acid? Oop, okay. uh, Whoops. And that's actually a good question. It's actually several different steps that take it from glucose. So this is the six carbon glucose. And then all of these different enzymes come in and do something a little bit different to cleave. So we're cleaving that energy bond. And then we're going to get a little bit of ATP. So before we even start, we actually have to add energy into the system, and we do that by adding ATP. So we need to invest, just like anything. You can't get something for free, so you need to invest. And in this case, we're investing 2 molecules of ATP to get the reaction going. So here we're going to add an ATP, and that's going to take that enzyme and add a phosphate group. And you'll learn later when you take more chemistry, phosphate groups are really the transfer of a phosphate, and that's the PO4, uh, really changes a molecule. So it can give it a little bit of energy or change it its function. So we're adding a phosphate. And then we're doing different steps, many different steps. And at this point, you don't really have to know what they are, but they are these long chemical reactions. And then finally, we're going to form pyruvate. So all these different reactions. So it's like little assembly lines. So one enzyme does one thing, the next one does another, the next one does another. And then finally, after all of these different enzymes, we're going to get pyruvate. Okay. And let me see what your next question is. Okay, so just to reiterate what I just said. So we have glucose, and we're going to go through glycolysis through all those different steps, and we're going to we have to put in ATP, but we also get ATP out. So our net results is we get 2 ATP. And yes, this is all anaerobic, so that means we don't need any oxygen. And so if our oxygen levels are low, if we're exercising much faster than we can get the oxygen in, we're just going to go through glycolysis, and we just make a little bit of ATP. But if we have oxygen, then we're going to go through the Krebs cycle, and we're going to make a lot more ATP. So, but we can do, so a sprinter who's like really running really fast is mostly going to be working in this area through anaerobic. Or if you just lift muscles, you don't really, just a quick muscle and you're not out of breath. And that's also, we're actually going to be going in the lactic acid formation. And so again, we just go through glucose and we split it and make pyruvate. And so what we have to do, if looking back on this step here, it's a little bit out of whoop. We actually put in NAD plus and a phosphate. But if we went through the Krebs cycle, this will be recycled. So the final step in anaerobic respiration is we have to regenerate that NADH. And we do that here. So we are actually going to be taking um, uh, the pyruvate, and we're going to regenerate the NAD here. So NADH, regenerating NAD here. So this can totally have its own cycle and it doesn't have to go through the electron transport system. And so we'll be making lactic acid or lactate here. And there's actually a couple of processes that the lactic acid has to go back in and then it gets regenerated back into the system in the body. Okay, so hopefully that answers your question. Let me know if you have more questions. I really like your questions.